There's a specific feeling that doesn't have a clean name. It's not failure. Nothing has collapsed. Nothing is visibly wrong. But something has quietly shifted. And you've been noticing it for a while now. You're functioning. You're respected. You're handling everything that needs to be handled. And yet, there's a dullness underneath it all that wasn't there before. Not depression, not burnout. Something more precise than either of those. What's actually happening is not what you think it is. When most people, when they feel this way, assume they've lost their edge. That somewhere between responsibility and routine, ambition quietly stepped out. But that's not what's happening. You didn't lose your edge moved, and no one told you where it went. Think about the last time you walked into a room and felt like you were building towards something. Not just contributing to it, not just managing it, building toward it. That feeling had a very specific quality, a kind of upward direction. When you walk into rooms now, you're respected. People recognize what you bring, but you're no longer rising. And something in you registers that difference even when you don't say it out loud. That's the surface of it. But what's underneath is worth understanding more carefully. Here's what quietly changes after 40. In your earlier years, confidence had a very reliable fuel source. Progression, new titles, expanding responsibility, visible milestones. Every achievement created a small but real sense of forward motion. And that motion felt like identity. You were becoming something. And becoming felt like thriving. Then, at some point, the milestones slowed. Not because you stopped performing, but because you reached a level of competence where the feedback loops changed. Early career success is loud. It announces itself. Mid-career competence is quiet. It sustains itself. It holds things together. And holding things together, while genuinely valuable, doesn't generate the same internal signal. Here's the belief disruption most people miss. Confidence doesn't erode from aging. It erodes when growth feedback loops slow down. You built competence. You never rebuilt identity beyond it. That's not a character flaw. It's a structural gap that almost no one explains to you, because everyone assumes stability means you've arrived. But stability and arrival are not the same thing. Yet, in confusing them is where the quiet erosion begins. Let's look at how identity actually works across a life. In your 20s and 30s, identity is expansion-based. You're moving, accumulating, differentiating yourself from where you started. The metrics are external: title, income, influence, comparison points, and they're updating frequently. Then comes the stabilization phase: the mortgage, the family, the established career, the reputation you've carefully built. These are real. They're not consolation prizes. They represent decades of considered decisions. But here's what happens psychologically when stabilization replaces expansion as your primary mode. The internal metric system you built for measuring yourself, the one calibrated to momentum, doesn't automatically recalibrate. It keeps looking for the same signals: upward movement, new recognition, expanding influence. And when those signals slow, the system interprets it as decline. Not because anything is declining, but because you're measuring a different phase of life with the wrong instrument. You succeeded at the first half. Completely. The dissonance you're feeling isn't failure. It's a measurement problem. And the shift forward requires something structurally different, not more effort applied to the old model. What most people don't realize is that experience, genuine, accumulated experience, functions differently than achievement. Achievement is a moment. Experience is a compound. At 25, you had ambition and potential. Those are real assets. But at 45, you have something that ambition and potential cannot buy: pattern recognition, calibrated judgment, the ability to see 10 steps ahead because you've already navigated 9 of them. That is not a consolation prize for getting older. That is a different class of asset entirely. You don't need more energy. You need different positioning. Yet the people who move through midlife with sustained confidence aren't running faster. They've repositioned what they're running as. Authority doesn't announce itself the way early career ambition does. It doesn't need to. When you walk into a room and speak from a decade of genuine experience, people don't just hear your words. They hear the weight behind them. That weight is real. The question is whether you recognize it as a form of forward motion. And yet, here's where it gets more complicated. Because the honest version of this conversation has to acknowledge something. You're not 25 with a blank slate. You know that. There's a mortgage. There are people depending on the stability you've built. There's a reputation in your industry that took years to establish. Fatigue is real, not weakness, just the accumulated weight of sustained responsibility over a long time. You can't burn it all down. And honestly, you don't want to. But the part of you that sometimes fantasizes about radical reinvention isn't actually asking for destruction. It's asking for expansion, for the feeling that the next decade has a different quality than the last one. That's a reasonable thing to want, and it's achievable, but not through the same mechanism that worked in your 20s. This is the part most midlife content gets wrong. It either tells you to burn it down and start over, which ignores everything you've built, or it tells you to be grateful for what you have, which ignores the legitimate need for continued growth. Neither of those addresses what's actually happening. You can't abandon what you've built. You don't need to. What needs to shift is not your life. It's the internal framework you're using to measure it. Here is the realization that tends to arrive later than it should. Self-worth, for most high-functioning people, was never truly internal. It was outsourced to momentum, to upward trajectory, to the feeling of becoming. And as long as you were becoming, the system worked. But becoming is not a permanent identity structure. At some point, every person who's building towards something has to decide what they're building as, not who they're trying to become, who they've already become, and what that's actually worth. The midlife confidence crisis isn't about losing something. It's about not yet recognizing what you've accumulated. Why, you spent 20 years building competence, credibility, and depth, and then you kept applying the emotional metrics of someone who hasn't built anything yet. Here's the reframe that changes the architecture of how this feels. Midlife is not the back half of your first chapter. It is the opening position of your second one. And the second chapter runs on leverage, not velocity. What you've built is not behind you. It's the starting point. Oh, the difference between someone who experiences midlife as contraction and someone who moves through it with compounding confidence is not energy, ambition, or circumstance. It's whether they understand that leverage operates differently than momentum. Momentum says, keep accelerating. Leverage says, you already hold more than you're using. You've outgrown the ambition structure you started with. That's not a sign that ambition is gone. Yet it's a sign that you need a structure built for where you actually are, not where you started. Stability is not stagnation, unless you mistake it for identity. The confidence you're looking for isn't waiting on the other side of a dramatic decision. It's in the gap between what you've built and what you currently believe that building is worth. That gap is worth closing, and it closes not through motion, but through recognition.